The doors of the Galactic Council chamber weighed more than a human starship. They were carved from the compressed core of a dead star, and they had stood for 11,000 years. In all that time, they had opened for emperors and conquerors, for diplomats and destroyers, for every species that had ever claimed a place among the stars. Today, they opened for a single human woman. Ambassador Diana Cole walked forward into a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat echoing off walls that stretched upward for nearly a mile. The chamber was built to intimidate. Thousands of alien representatives sat in ascending tiers that spiraled toward a ceiling lost in artificial clouds. Light filtered down from sources that mimicked dying suns. The air itself carried the weight of judgment. Diana had been a school teacher before the arrival. She had taught 5th grade in a small town in Vermont, where the biggest crisis was usually a forgotten permission slip. That was before the alien ships appeared in Earth's sky. That was before humanity learned it was not alone. That was before everything changed. Now she represented her entire species before the most powerful governing body in the known universe. The High Tribunal sat at the center of the chamber on a platform that floated without visible support. 5 beings of 5 different species, each one ancient beyond human comprehension. They had judged civilizations. They had ended wars. They had, on 17 occasions, ordered the complete sterilization of entire worlds. Diana kept walking. Her footsteps were the only sound. The creature at the center of the tribunal rose. It was called the Arbiter, and it belonged to a species so old that their original name had been forgotten. It stood 12 feet tall, wrapped in robes made from woven light. Its face was a collection of geometric shapes that shifted constantly, never settling into anything a human mind could process. The Galactic Council recognizes the representative of Earth, the Arbiter announced. Its voice came from everywhere at once. You stand accused of crimes against the dominion of Keth. You stand accused of the corruption of protected beings. You stand accused of threatening the genetic integrity of a founding species. Diana reached the central podium. It was designed for creatures twice her size. She had to crane her neck to see the tribunal above her. How does humanity plead? The chamber waited. 3,000 species held their breath. Diana thought about her students back in Vermont. She thought about how she used to tell them that being brave did not mean being unafraid. It meant being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Not guilty, she said. Her voice carried without amplification, a small miracle of council acoustics. And if the tribunal will permit, I would like to explain why reading bedtime stories to children is not a crime in any civilization worth preserving. The chamber erupted. The delegation from Keth dominated the eastern tier. They were massive creatures, built like wolves that had learned to walk upright. Their fur was black as space itself, and their eyes burned with copper fire. They were apex predators, the most feared warriors in 3 galaxies. Their empire spanned 800 worlds, and their military had never known defeat. Their leader, a scarred patriarch called Vorith, slammed his fist against the railing with enough force to crack the stone. She mocks us, Vorith roared. She admits her crime and calls it innocent. I demand the blood price. I demand justice for what was done to my offspring. The Arbiter raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. Ambassador Cole, the charges are severe. The evidence has been reviewed. 3 of the High Commander's children were found in an unauthorized area of a human diplomatic vessel. They were found in physical contact with a human crew member. They were found exhibiting behaviors that the Keth consider corrupted. The Arbiter paused. Its geometric face shifted into something that might have been curiosity. Explain. Diana took a breath. She had prepared for this moment for 3 weeks, ever since the incident aboard the transport ship Meridian. She had read everything she could find about Keth culture, their history, their values. She understood why they were afraid. She also understood that they were wrong. 3 weeks ago, Diana began, the diplomatic transport Meridian was assigned to carry a Keth delegation to this station. The delegation included High Commander Vorth and his 3 children. The children are young by Keth standards, roughly equivalent to human 6-year-olds. She paused, letting the council absorb this. On the 3rd night of the journey, a member of our crew was alone in the observation lounge. Her name is Dr. Grace Palmer. She is a xenobiologist. She was reading on her personal tablet a book from Earth called The Wind in the Willows. It is a children's story about animals who are friends. A ripple of confusion passed through the assembly. Many species had no concept of stories told purely for entertainment. The 3 cubs found her there. They had wandered from their quarters. Dr. Palmer did not chase them away. She did not alert security. She did not treat them as threats. Diana looked directly at Vorth. She asked them if they wanted to hear a story. The Keth delegation stirred. Varath's copper eyes narrowed. Over the following days, Dr. Palmer read to the cubs every night. She read them stories about friendship and courage. She read them stories about kindness and sacrifice. And the cubs responded. Diana pulled up a holographic display. Security footage appeared in the air above her. The council watched as 3 massive predator cubs curled around a small human woman, their eyes closed in contentment. They watched as Dr. Grace Palmer fell asleep mid-sentence, her tablet slipping from her fingers. They watched as the cubs did not leave. They watched as the cubs positioned themselves protectively around her. When the ship's sensors detected the anomaly, the captain alerted High Commander Vorth. The commander arrived to find his children guarding a human with their own bodies. When he entered the room, they growled. Diana paused. They growled at their own father. To protect her, the chamber had gone very still. The Keth consider this corruption, Diana continued. They believe that their children have been weakened. They believe that exposure to human gentleness has damaged their predator instincts. She straightened her shoulders and faced the tribunal directly. Humanity believes something different. We believe that Dr. Palmer gave those children something they had never received before, something that every child, regardless of species, deserves. The arbiter leaned forward slightly. And what is that, Ambassador? Diana thought about her classroom in Vermont. She thought about every scared child who had ever needed comfort. She thought about what it meant to be human in a universe that seemed designed to make everything hard. She gave them safety, Diana said. She gave them peace. She read them a story and made them feel loved. The chamber remained silent, but something had shifted. Diana could feel it. The trial had only begun, but she had planted a seed. Now she had to hope it would grow before the Keth demanded blood. The council declared a recess, but no one truly rested. In the corridors of the station, delegations whispered to each other in languages that had existed before Earth's sun ignited. The human accusation had stirred something that most species preferred to leave buried. The question of what children needed. Ambassador, Diana Cole found herself escorted to a private chamber, where a holographic link connected her to the Meridian. The ship was still docked at the station's outer ring, held under council authority until the trial concluded. Dr. Grace Palmer's face appeared in the projection. She looked tired but calm. Behind her, 3 pairs of copper eyes gleamed in the dimness. They still won't leave? Diana asked. Grace glanced back at the cubs. Ren is the oldest. He has decided that I need protection. His siblings follow his lead. The largest cub, a male whose shoulders already reached Grace's waist, pressed closer to her side. His black fur rippled as he watched the holographic projection with obvious suspicion. The Keth are demanding your surrender to their justice system, Diana said carefully. Their laws would allow them to execute you for what they call corruption of bloodlines. Grace nodded slowly. I know. Commander Voreth came to the ship an hour ago. He demanded entry to this room. What happened? A small smile crossed Grace's face. The cubs blocked the door. Little Mera actually snapped at him. Her own father. Diana closed her eyes. This was precisely what made the situation so dangerous. Among the Keth, pack bonds were sacred. They were also supposed to be exclusive to blood relations. The fact that the cubs had formed a protective attachment to a human was unprecedented. Some Keth scholars were calling it an abomination. Others were calling it something else entirely. There's a faction forming, Diana said. Younger Keth warriors. They've been watching the footage of you with the cubs. They're asking questions that no one wants to answer. What kind of questions? Why the cubs seem happy. Why they're calmer than any Keth children anyone has seen. Why they sleep peacefully instead of having the nightmares that plague their species. Grace looked back at the cubs again. Tavik, the middle one, had fallen asleep against her leg. His breathing was slow and even, his face relaxed in a way that Keth children supposedly never achieved. I just read to them, Grace said quietly. That's all I did. They came to me because they were scared and lonely. They had never been away from their homeworld before. The ship was strange. The darkness was strange. They didn't understand why their father never came to comfort them. Keth parents don't comfort their children, Diana replied. They consider it weakness. I know that now. Grace reached down and gently stroked Tavik's fur. He stirred slightly, then settled deeper into sleep. But I didn't know it then. I just saw 3 frightened children. I did what I would do for any child. The holographic link flickered. A new signal was requesting access. Diana's eyes widened. That's Commander Vorath's personal channel. Grace straightened. Let him through. The projection split, and Vorath's massive form appeared beside Diana's image. His copper eyes found Grace immediately, then moved to his children. Something shifted in his expression when he saw Tavik sleeping so peacefully. Human, he growled. I have questions. Grace met his gaze without flinching. I'll answer what I can. My warriors speak of what they saw in the footage. They say my children showed no fear when you approached them. They say my children reached toward you. They chose to be near you. Yes. Why? It was such a simple question. It carried the weight of generations. Grace considered her answer carefully. Commander, when your children came to me, they were trembling. Not from cold, from fear. They were in a strange place, surrounded by strange beings, and no one had told them it was going to be all right. Vorath's claws extended slightly. Fear builds strength. It is our way. With respect, Commander, your children were not building strength. They were suffering. And when I offered them comfort, they accepted it because every living creature, regardless of species, needs to feel safe sometimes. The silence stretched between them. My eldest shows me drawings now, Vorath said slowly. Pictures of the stories you told. Rivers and boats and small animals who are friends. He asks me why we do not have such tailies. Grace tilted her head. What did you tell him? I told him such tailies are for the weak. And what did he say? Vorath's jaw tightened. He asked me if being kind was the same as being weak. From the corner of the room, Ren lifted his head. The young cub looked at his father's image with eyes that held something new. Not defiance. Not fear. Curiosity. Father, Ren said. His voice was rough, still learning the sounds of Galactic Standard. Mother Elena showed us that the mole went on an adventure. He was scared, but he had friends. They helped him be brave. Vorath stared at his son. Mother Elena? Grace winced slightly. They started calling me that 2 days ago. I tried to explain that I'm not their mother, but they insisted. Something cracked in Varath's expression. It was small, barely visible, but Diana caught it. The High Commander of the Keth, the greatest warrior of his generation, was looking at his children with an emotion he probably could not name. The tribunal reconvenes in 1 hour, Diana said quietly. Commander, if you're going to act, it needs to be now. Varath's copper eyes moved from his sleeping son to the human woman who had somehow claimed his children's hearts. The woman who should have been prey. The woman who had shown no fear when 3 apex predators curled around her in the darkness. The Dominion demands justice, he said slowly. What kind of justice? Diana pressed .vor. Wrath was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that no Keth commander had ever done. He bowed his head to a human. I do not know yet, he admitted. But I will find out. The holographic link terminated. Diana stood alone in the chamber, her heart pounding. She had bought time. Perhaps she had even planted doubt in Varath's mind. But the trial was far from over. And somewhere in the station, other forces were moving. Forces that did not want reconciliation. Forces that wanted humanity and the Keth to destroy each other. She did not know yet who they were, but she had a feeling she was about to find out in the observation lounge of the Meridian. Grace Palmer gathered the 3 cubs close. They pressed against her, warm and heavy and trusting. Whatever happens, she whispered. I want you to know that I am proud to be your mother, Elena, even if it's only for a little while. Little Mira looked up with her copper eyes. You will stay with us forever? Grace wished she could promise that. She wished she could tell them that everything would be fine. Instead, she did what she had always done. Let me tell you a story, she said, about a spider named Charlotte who loved a pig named Wilbur, and about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is love someone. The cubs settled in to listen. Outside the ship, the stars burned cold and distant, and the clock was ticking. The tribunal reconvened with a tension that crackled through the chamber like electricity before a storm. Ambassador Diana Cole stood at her podium, but she was no longer alone. Beside her, projected in full holographic form, Dr. Grace Palmer had been granted permission to testify directly. The arbiter's geometric face shifted into patterns that suggested deep consideration. Dr. Palmer, you understand that your testimony may determine whether your species faces sanctions or war? Grace nodded. She had spent the last hour preparing, but nothing could truly ready someone for this moment. 3,000 species watched her. Billions of beings across the galaxy would see recordings of her words. And behind her, somewhere on the Meridian, 3 cubs were waiting to learn if they would ever see her again. I understand, she said. Then speak. Grace looked out at the assembly. She saw hostility on some faces, curiosity on others. And in the Keth delegation, she saw Vorath watching with an expression she could not read. I grew up on a farm in a place called Iowa, she began. When I was 7 years old, we had a barn cat who gave birth to 6 kittens. One of them was weak. The mother rejected it. She pushed it away from the others and would not feed it. The chamber was silent. Many species had no equivalent to the scenario she described. My father told me that nature had made a choice, that the weak kitten would die and the strong ones would live. That was the natural order. Grace paused, remembering. I snuck out every night for 3 weeks. I fed that kitten with an eyedropper. I kept it warm with my own body heat. I stayed awake past midnight, making sure it survived. She looked directly at Vorath. That kitten grew up to be the best mouser on the farm. She lived for 18 years. She was stronger than any of her siblings because she had learned to fight for every breath. The arbiter leaned forward. What is the relevance of this story to the current matter? The relevance, Grace said, is that humans do not abandon the weak. We do not believe that strength comes from suffering alone. We believe that sometimes the strongest beings are the ones who are loved when they had nothing else. A murmur rippled through the assembly. When the 3 Keth cubs came to me, they were not weak. They were frightened. There is a difference. Fear does not make a creature lesser. Fear is simply a signal that something needs attention. She pulled up the security footage again. The image of the cubs curled around her filled the chamber. I did not drug them. I did not manipulate them. I read them stories about courage and friendship because those are the values I believe in. And they responded because somewhere, deep in their instincts, they recognize something that transcends species. And what is that? The arbiter asked. The need to be seen. The need to be valued. The need to know that someone will stay with them in the darkness. The chamber fell silent. Then a new voice cut through the stillness. This is manipulation disguised as philosophy. All eyes turned to the western tier, where the Voryx delegation sat in shadow. The Voryx were ancient enemies of humanity, though no open conflict had ever occurred. They were insectoid beings with compound eyes and exoskeletons that shifted color with their emotions. Their ambassador, a creature called Nexus, rose to its full height. Humans spread corruption wherever they go, Nexus declared. They call it compassion. They call it kindness. But it is a virus. It weakens strong species and makes them dependent on human approval. Diana stepped forward. The council has not recognized the Voryx delegation to speak. Nexus ignored her. We have evidence that this incident was planned. That humans deliberately targeted Keth offspring to create exactly this situation. To drive a wedge between the Dominion and the rest of the galaxy. The chamber erupted in confusion. Varath's eyes blazed with sudden fury. You accuse humans of conspiracy? The arbiter demanded. We do. Nexus uploaded a data file to the central display. Communications intercepted from Earth. Plans to infiltrate Keth society through their children. A systematic campaign to undermine predator species across the galaxy. Diana felt her blood run cold. She had seen fabricated evidence before. She recognized the signs. But the Voryx had been thorough. The documents looked authentic. This is a lie, she said firmly. Then explain these transmissions, Nexus countered. Explain why Dr. Palmer was specifically assigned to the Meridian. Explain why she had preloaded human children's stories on her tablet before the journey began. Grace shook her head. I always carry those stories. I read them when I'm homesick. I've had the same files for 20 years. But doubt was spreading through the assembly. Diana could see it. The Voryx had chosen their moment perfectly. The council will recess to examine this evidence, the arbiter announced. No. Everyone turned. Commander Voryx had risen from his seat. He stood at the railing of the Keth delegation, his massive form casting shadows across the tier below. The council will not recess, he said. The council will hear what I have to say. The arbiter's geometric face flickered. You wish to address the assembly? I do. Voryx descended from the tier. His warriors followed, forming a protective formation around him. The chamber watched as the greatest predator in 3 galaxies walked toward the central platform. He stopped beside Grace's holographic form. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Then he turned to face the tribunal. 3 weeks ago, I would have demanded this human's death. I would have called her actions an act of war. I would have believed every word the Voryx have spoken. His copper eyes found Nexus. But 3 weeks ago, I had not seen my daughter smile. I had not heard my son ask questions about friendship. I had not watched my children sleep peacefully for the first time in their lives. The chamber was utterly still. The Voryx evidence is false. I know this because my own intelligence officers have been tracking Voryx communications for the past 72 hours. We know that they fabricated these documents. We know that they want humanity and the Dominion to destroy each other. He pulled up his own data files. Counter-evidence. Proof of Vorax manipulation. The Vorax fear what humans represent. They fear a galaxy where strength is not measured in conquest. They fear a future where their brutality is no longer rewarded. Vorath turned to look at Grace one more time. I do not fully understand what this human has done to my children, but I know that they are better for it. And I will not let lies destroy something that might be important. Nexus's exoskeleton flushed red with fury. You would betray your own kind for prey creatures? Vorath bared his fangs in what might have been a smile. I would protect my children. That is what predators do. The chamber held its breath, and somewhere in the shadows, Nexus's compound eyes glittered with a malice that went far beyond. Politics. This was not over. It had only just begun. The explosion rocked the station 17 minutes. After the tribunal recessed. Ambassador Diana Cole was thrown against the corridor wall as emergency lights flooded the passage with crimson. Alarms screamed in 36 languages. The floor beneath her feet groaned with structural stress. She pushed herself up, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Around her, delegates from 100 species scrambled for safety. The station's defense systems activated, sealing bulkheads and routing power to shields that had not been tested in centuries. Her communicator crackled. Ambassador Cole, this is the Meridian. We're under attack. Diana's heart stopped. The ship? Is Dr. Palmer safe? Unknown. Hull breach in sections 3 through 7. We've lost contact with the observation lounge. Diana ran. She pushed through crowds of panicking aliens, ducked under falling debris, and sprinted toward the docking ring where the Meridian was connected to the station. Her mind raced through possibilities. The Vorax had been humiliated in the chamber. Their conspiracy had been exposed. This was their response. Total chaos. When she reached the docking bay, she found Commander Vorath already there. His warriors had formed a perimeter around the Meridian's airlock, but the door was jammed. Emergency protocols had sealed the ship. My children are in there, Vorath snarled. He was clawing at the airlock door with enough force to gouge metal. So is Dr. Palmer, Diana replied. We need to work together. For a fraction of a second, Vorath's copper eyes met hers. Something passed between them. An understanding that went beyond species, beyond politics, beyond everything except the simple truth that people they cared about were in danger. My engineers, Vorath said. They can override the seal. Do it. The Keth technicians moved with terrifying efficiency. Within 90 seconds, the airlock groaned open. Smoke poured out. The corridor beyond was dark, except for the flickering of damaged lighting systems. Vorath went first. Diana followed close behind, ignoring every protocol that said a diplomatic ambassador should not enter a potential combat zone. Behind them came Vorath's elite guard, weapons drawn and scanning for threats. They found the first body 30 meters in. A Vorax infiltrator, killed by what appeared to be claw marks. The wounds were too small to be from an adult Keth. Vorath stopped. His nostrils flared. Cubs, he whispered. They moved faster. The observation lounge doors had been torn off their hinges. Inside, the scene made Diana's breath catch. 3 Vorax assassins lay scattered across the room. 2 were dead. The third was barely alive, pinned beneath debris and bleeding from multiple wounds. Standing over them, fur matted with blood that was not their own, were Ren Tavik and little Miradot, and behind the cubs, pressed into the corner where they had clearly pushed her for protection, was Grace Palmer. She was alive. Bruised and shaken, but alive. Father, Ren said. His voice was steady despite the blood on his claws. They came to hurt Mother Elena. We stopped them. Voreth stared at his son. The cub was barely old enough to hunt, but he had taken down trained assassins. His siblings had fought beside him. They had protected a human woman with their own bodies. You should not have been able to do this, Voreth said slowly. Ren lifted his chin. Mother Elena tells us stories about heroes. Heroes protect the ones they love. We wanted to be heroes. Grace stepped forward, her legs unsteady. Commander, they saved my life. When the explosion hit, they shielded me. When the assassins came through the door, they attacked without hesitation. She looked at the three cubs with an expression that made Diana's throat tighten. They were so brave. Voreth crossed the room. He stopped in front of his children, these cubs who had somehow become something new, something the Keth had never seen before. Then he did something unprecedented. He knelt down to their level. You fought well, he said. But more than that, you fought for something beyond yourselves. That is rare. That is precious. Little Myra pressed against her father's chest. We were scared, Father. But Mother Elena says being brave means doing what is right even when you are scared. Voreth looked up at Grace, the human woman who had changed everything. I owe you a debt, he said. My children's lives. My understanding of what they can become. These are things I cannot repay. You don't owe me anything, Grace replied. I just told them stories. No. Voreth rose to his full height. You gave them something our civilization forgot how to give. You reminded them that strength without compassion is just cruelty with muscle. The station's communication system crackled. A new voice filled the air. This is Nexus of the Vorix Collective. The bombs planted throughout this station will detonate in 15 minutes unless our demands are met. Diana felt ice form in her chest. We demand the immediate surrender of the human, female called Grace Palmer. We demand the dissolution of any alliance between humanity and the Keth Dominion. We demand that the Galactic Council recognize that humanity is a corrupting influence that must be contained. The voice paused. If these demands are not met, this station dies. 3,000 delegates, 50,000 support staff. All of them. Vorath's warriors raised their weapons, but there was nothing to shoot. The bombs were hidden. The timer was running. Diana's mind raced. 15 minutes. Thousands of lives. An impossible choice. Ambassador, Voreth said quietly, the Vorix want Dr. Palmer. If we surrender her, they may deactivate the bombs. Grace stepped forward before Diana could respond. Then surrender me. No, Voreth and Diana said simultaneously. Grace shook her head. I won't let thousands die to protect one person. That's not who I am. That's not what I taught the cubs. Mother Elena, no. Myra's voice was sharp with distress. You cannot leave us. Grace knelt down and gathered the three cubs close. They pressed against her, whimpering softly, these apex predators who had just killed to protect her. Remember what I told you about Charlotte and Wilbur? She whispered. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes being brave means making hard choices. But the spider died, Havoc said. Charlotte died at the end. Yes, but Wilbur never forgot her. And her children lived on. That's what matters. The love doesn't end just because we do. Diana watched this moment, her heart breaking. She thought about protocol. She thought about politics. She thought about everything she was supposed to represent. Then she thought about what it meant to be human. No one is being surrendered, she said. We have 15 minutes. That's enough time. Voreth looked at her sharply. Enough time for what? Diana pulled out her communicator. Enough time to find the bombs and stop them. Enough time to prove that humans and Keth can work together. Enough time to show the entire galaxy what happens when you threaten our family. She met Varath's copper eyes. Because that's what we are now. Commander, family, and humans protect their family. Vorath bared his fangs in what might have been a smile. Then let us hunt together, Ambassador. The Vorix have made their last mistake. The countdown continued. 14 minutes remained, and somewhere in the shadows of the station, Nexus watched his screens and waited for humanity to make its final choice. He had no idea what was coming. 12 minutes remained when the hunt began. Commander, Vorath divided his warriors into teams. Keth's senses were sharper than any scanner technology. They could smell chemical compounds through walls. They could hear heartbeats from 50 meters away. Within 3 minutes, they had located 4 of the 7 bombs. Human engineers worked alongside them, analyzing the devices and transmitting data back to the Council's technical specialists. The bombs were sophisticated, but not unbeatable. Each one required a specific disarmament sequence. Ambassador Diana Cole coordinated from the central hub, her voice steady as she directed teams across the station. She had managed crisis situations before, but never with stakes this high. Never with so many lives depending on her ability to stay calm. 9 minutes remained. 3 more bombs located. 6 total. 1 still hidden. The 7th device is different, reported a Keth technician. Larger yield. Central placement. If we find it too late, the others won't matter. Diana closed her eyes for a moment. Think, where would Nexus hide his most important bomb? Then it hit her. The council chamber, she said. It's in the council chamber. Varath's team was closest. They raced through corridors that had been cleared of civilians, their claws striking sparks against metal floors. Diana ran with them, refusing to stay behind. They reached the chamber doors with 6 minutes to spare. Inside, Nexus was waiting. The Vorix ambassador stood on the central platform, his exoskeleton pulsing with deep red light. Behind him, attached to the Arbiter's floating dais, was the 7th bomb. It was larger than the others, large enough to vaporize everything within a kilometer. Stop there, Nexus commanded. 1 step closer and I detonate manually. Varath's warriors froze. Their weapons were useless. Any attack would trigger the bomb. Diana stepped forward slowly. Ambassador Nexus, this doesn't have to end in death. Nexus's compound eyes glittered. Death is all humanity deserves. You spread through the galaxy like a disease. You make the strong weak and call it progress. We make allies, Diana replied. We build connections. Is that really so threatening? It threatens everything we are. Nexus's voice rose with fervor. The Vorix became powerful through strength alone, through conquest and fear. We ruled 100 worlds before humanity even discovered fire. And now you come with your stories and your compassion, and you think you can change the fundamental nature of the universe. He gestured at the bomb. This is my answer. This is the answer of all species who refuse to be contaminated by your weakness. 4 minutes remained. Diana took another step. You said humanity makes the strong weak. But look at what actually happened. Keth cubs fought off trained assassins to protect a human woman. Their father, the greatest warrior of his generation, is fighting to save a station full of strangers. That's not weakness. That's strength we helped them find. Nexus shook his head. Corruption. You have corrupted them. We have freed them. Diana's voice grew stronger. We showed them that there's more than one way to be powerful. That caring for others doesn't make you less. It makes you more. A new voice joined the conversation. She's right. Everyone turned. Grace Palmer stood in the doorway of the council chamber. Behind her, pressed close against her legs, were Ren, Tavik, and little Mira. Dr. Palmer, get back, Diana commanded. Grace shook her head. Ambassador Nexus, I'm the one you want. If you let everyone else go, I'll surrender myself. Nexus's compound eyes focused on her. The female, the storyteller, the one who started all of this. Yes. Grace walked forward, gently pushing the cubs back when they tried to follow. I'm the one who read to the children. I'm the one who showed them kindness. If that's a crime, then punish me. But only me. She stopped a few meters from the platform. You called what I did corruption. But look at those cubs. Really look at them. Nexus's gaze flicked to Ren, Tavik, and Myra. They stood at the doorway, copper eyes blazing, young bodies trembling with the effort of not charging forward. They're not weak, Grace continued. They're not damaged. They just learned that being strong doesn't mean being alone. They learned that asking for help isn't surrender. They learned that love can make you braver than you ever thought possible. 2 minutes remained. I don't know if you've ever been loved, Ambassador, Grace said softly. I don't know if anyone ever read you stories or held you when you were scared. But I know that somewhere, deep down, even you remember what it felt like to want those things. Nexus's exoskeleton flickered through colors. His compound eyes seemed to dim. I was the weakest of my clutch, he said slowly. The others left me to die. I survived through hatred. Hatred for everything soft. Everything gentle. Everything that reminded me of what I never had. Grace nodded. And that pain made you think that no one else should have what you couldn't. But Nexus, that's not strength. That's just more suffering. 1 minute remained. Let me tell you a story, Grace said. Not a long one. Just the end of one. She stepped closer still. Close enough to touch him. There's a book called The Velveteen Rabbit. It's about a toy who wants to be real. And at the end, a fairy tells him the secret. She says that once you've been truly loved, you become real forever. Even if you're lost or forgotten, the love makes you permanent. Grace reached out and placed her hand on Nexus's arm. You were never loved, so you never felt real, and you thought destroying everyone else would somehow fill that void. But it won't. It never will. 30 seconds. Nexus looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at the cubs in the doorway. He looked at Vorith and Diana and all the beings who were watching this moment. I don't know how to stop, he whispered. That's okay, Grace said. I'll help you. She turned her head toward Diana. Can you disarm it? Diana moved forward carefully. The bomb's interface was exposed. The disarmament sequence was complex, but not impossible. 10 seconds. Her fingers flew across the controls. 5 seconds. The countdown froze. The bomb went silent. Nexus collapsed against Grace, his exoskeleton fading to a dull gray. He was not dead. He was not even unconscious. He was simply empty, as if something that had held him together for centuries had finally given way. Grace held him as the Keth warriors secured the chamber. She held him as emergency teams flooded in. She held him as the station's systems reported that all 7 bombs had been neutralized. And when little Myra finally broke free and ran to her, Grace held the cub too. Is the bad one okay? Myra asked, looking at Nexus with something that might have been pity. He's going to need help, Grace said. He was hurting for a very long time. Will you tell him stories too? Grace smiled through her tears. Maybe, if he wants to listen. 6 months later, the Galactic Council passed a resolution recognizing what they called the Palmer Protocol. Human storytellers were invited to stations throughout the galaxy. Libraries of Earth literature were translated into hundreds of languages. A new era of cultural exchange began. Commander Vorith returned to the Keth homeworld with his children. The cubs were different now, but the Dominion learned to see that difference as evolution rather than corruption. Other families began asking questions, began wondering if there was another way to raise their young. And Grace Palmer, the xenobiologist who had only wanted to read a book when she was homesick, became the most famous human in the galaxy. Not for conquering worlds or winning wars, for telling stories, for showing the universe that the greatest strength of all was the courage to be kind. And every night, in her quarters on a ship that traveled between the stars, she read to whoever needed to hear. Keth cubs and Vorax children and species she had never encountered before. They all came to listen, because every living being, no matter how different, needed to know that somewhere, someone would stay with them in the darkness. That was what humans had learned over thousands of years. That was what they taught the stars. And the stars, finally, began to listen.